At 4:17 a.m., a rumor lit up the internet like a match in a dark hallway. It claimed that somewhere inside Royal Lodge Prince Andrew's long controversial Windsor home, 3 investigators stood over a vault door that wasn't supposed to exist, and when it finally opened, one of them supposedly whispered, "This changes everything." Sounds like a movie, except this story spread because people want to believe there's one hidden place where all the unanswered questions live. So here's what we're doing today. We're going to walk through the version people are obsessing over, and then we'll separate the verified reality from the viral speculation, because the truth around Andrew is already messy enough without turning guesses into facts. And once you understand what's actually been confirmed about Andrew's money, his status inside the family, and why Royal Lodge has become a pressure point, you'll see why a vault. The story is the perfect rumor to explode at the worst possible time, but this didn't start with a vault. It started with something far more dangerous to the monarchy than any locked door. The moment the palace realized silence wasn't working anymore. For years, the royal strategy around Prince Andrew was simple: make him disappear. After the backlash from his 2019 BBC interview and the global fury over his association with Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew announced he would step back from public duties for the foreseeable future. The Guardian, that move wasn't a comeback plan. It was damage control. And for a while, the palace treated it like a lid on a boiling pot. Keep it closed. Wait for the heat to fade. Then came the civil case with Virginia Giuffre. Andrew denied wrongdoing, but settled out of court in 2022 without admitting liability. While acknowledging her suffering in the settlement statement, ABC+1, in public terms, it was framed like an ending. In reality, it was a new beginning because a settlement doesn't erase questions. It just changes what people ask next. Instead of, did it happen? The conversation turns into, who knew what? And when that's the kind of question monarchies hate. Because it doesn't just target one person, it spreads outward. And by 2025, that spread had a new focal point. Not a balcony, not a ceremony, but a house. Royal Lodge, a 30-room mansion inside Windsor Great Park, tied up in a long lease arrangement that's become a public obsession, especially as reporting and commentary kept circling the same point. How does Andrew afford anything, and why is he still there? The Guardian+1, that's where the rumor machine starts to feed itself. Because when the public sees someone disappeared but still living in a massive royal property, the mind immediately goes to the same place. There must be more they're not telling us. And that's when stories about hidden rooms and sealed boxes start to feel believable even when there's no proof. But the pressure around Royal Lodge isn't imaginary, it's real. It's documented, it's political, and it's been building. Here's the part nobody needs to invent. Andrew's position inside the royal family has been shrinking for years, and the reporting in 2002 for 2025 made one thing clear: King Charles has been trying to reduce the ways Andrew can remain a liability. Multiple outlets have reported that Charles cut or reduced Andrew's financial support and private security funding, and that pushing Andrew out of Royal Lodge has been a goal, but not an easy one because of the lease structure and costs. Hello. Plus to The Guardian, +2, and then, in late 2025, that situation got even noisier. The Guardian ran explainers on whether Andrew can be evicted and what the arrangement actually is. The Guardian campaigners even staged public protests outside Royal Lodge demanding the royals be investigated, explicitly framing it as who knew what and when and why Andrew was still being protected. Republic.org.uk, that matters because it shows why the palace would be hypersensitive to anything connected to Andrew's living situation. Now add gasoline. In the same time window, renewed media attention hit again, including a surge of coverage tied to Giuffre's story and fresh public calls for more Epstein-related files to be unsealed. PBS+1, even if you ignore the rumor side completely, you can see the outline of a crisis. Andrew remains radioactive. Royal Lodge remains a symbol. Money questions keep coming back. And the palace has to convince the public that Andrew isn't being quietly protected forever. So when an online story says, investigators opened a secret vault at Royal Lodge, it doesn't spread because it's confirmed. It spreads because it fits the emotional shape of what people already suspect. And here's the scary part. Emotional shape is often more powerful than facts on YouTube. Now let's get into what the rumor actually claims to be, because understanding that claim is the key to writing a script that keeps viewers locked in. The viral version usually begins the same way: a late-night arrival, a side entrance, a house that feels emptier somehow, a team with credentials that can go anywhere, and a door hidden behind a false panel. It's always described like a point of no return moment, not because that's verified, but because it's the most addictive storytelling device there is. The idea that someone finally crossed a line they promised they'd never crossed. In some versions, the team is described as a retired police commander, a financial crime legal expert, and a digital forensics specialist. In others, it's framed as palace security, cooperating with outside authorities. And then comes the centerpiece: the vault opening, cold, stale air, boxers stacked with labels, a folder with initials, a smaller safe inside the safe. This is where the rumor goes from spicy to explosive, because it starts naming the kinds of evidence that would be devastating in any major scandal: offshore accounts, shell companies, undisclosed property holdings, correspondence contradicting earlier statements, and offline laptop with encrypted files, personal notes that prove he knew. Let's be absolutely clear: there is no credible, verified reporting that a secret vault was opened and that these specific items were found exactly as described. A lot of this reads like dramatized speculation, or like a story built from real public anxieties, but the reason it's so effective is that it borrows from something real: the ongoing public mystery about Andrew's finances and support. The Guardian literally called it the mystery of Prince Andrew's money, pointing to questions over how he pays for things and what support he's had. The Guardian, so even when the vault story is unverified, it piggybacks on a very real public feeling. We don't know the full picture, and that's why this rumor doesn't die, because it doesn't have to be true to be clickable. It only has to be plausible enough to make viewers think, wait, what if? But here's where your script wins retention. You don't stay stuck in the rumor. You use it as a doorway into the real stakes. Because the monarchy's nightmare isn't a vault. It's the possibility that somebody else, journalists, investigators, foreign courts, Parliament, forces disclosure at a time the palace can't control. And that's exactly what the palace tries to avoid. To understand why Royal Lodge became the perfect stage for this kind of story, you need to understand how royal protection actually works. It isn't always dramatic. It's usually boring. It's routine legal reviews, careful wording, and a constant calculation. What protects the institution? Sometimes that means defending a family member, and sometimes it means doing the opposite, creating distance so the institution survives. That's why the reporting around Royal Lodge and finances matters so much, because when the palace is seen as funding Andrew, housing Andrew, or shielding Andrew, the story shifts from Andrew did something to the royals covered something. That's the leap that can damage the whole system. And in 2025, that leap became easier for critics to push because public agitation wasn't just gossip anymore, became organized protest groups openly asked why Andrew was still at Royal Lodge and demanded investigation. Republic.org.uk, meanwhile, media commentary kept circling the same uncomfortable point. The optics of Andrew's living situation were terrible, and the financial arrangements were confusing. The Guardian, Plus One, even some recent tabloid-style reporting, while not always reliable on specifics, shows how intense the narrative has become. People are now obsessing over the move itself, the storage of possessions, and the cover of darkness vibe around relocating items. Cosmopolitan, Plus One, and that cover of darkness detail. It feeds directly into conspiracy storytelling, because viewers hear that and think, what are they hiding? Now, do we know what's in those boxes? No. But do we know the conditions are perfect for the internet to fill in the blank? Absolutely. And in a retention script, blanks are your best friend because they invite the viewer to keep watching. But the script can't be all vibe. You need substance. So here's the substance. What has been confirmed about Andrew's downfall is already severe without adding fictional vaults. And that particular day we now understand is the date, which is the 10th of March. I was at home on December 10th, deep inside a secure room at Royal Lodge. 3 senior investigators stood frozen as the vault door finally swung open. The lead investigator, a man who had spent 30 years handling sensitive royal matters, his next words, barely audible in the cold silence, would echo through Buckingham Palace within the hour. "This changes everything." What they discovered inside wasn't just damaging, it was catastrophic, and so explosive that even experienced palace officials would struggle to contain the fallout. What could possibly be so catastrophic that even hardened investigators were shaken? Join us to find out. The moment everything shattered. To understand the gravity of what happened at 4:17 a.m. on December 10th, we must step back 12 hours earlier to the moment when the decision to breach Andrew's private vault became unavoidable. The order came not from a single voice, but from a convergence of pressure so intense that even King Charles, who had resisted this step for months, finally accepted there was no other path forward. The investigation team arrived at Royal Lodge just after midnight. 3 men, each carrying credentials that granted them access to spaces most royals considered untouchable. Sir Malcolm Riss led the group, a former Metropolitan Police commander with decades of experience in sensitive investigations. Beside him stood David Crane, a legal advisor whose expertise in international financial crime had made him indispensable to the palace during its most difficult moments. The third man, whose name remains protected under security protocols, specialized in digital forensics and had worked quietly on cases involving encrypted communications and hidden assets. They entered through a side entrance, away from the view of any lingering photographers who still occasionally camped near the property. The house felt different at night, emptier somehow, as if the walls themselves understood that something irreversible was about to happen. Staff had been dismissed earlier that evening. Andrew had been relocated, temporarily to a small apartment in London, under the premise of routine security updates. He did not know what was truly unfolding at his former residence. The vault itself was located in a room few people even knew existed, behind a false panel in what appeared to be a storage closet, accessible only through a biometric lock that had been quietly overridden using legal authority granted by the king himself. The process took nearly 4 hours. Specialists worked carefully, methodically, aware that any misstep could compromise evidence or trigger security alerts that would complicate an already delicate situation. When the vault door finally opened, the air inside rushed out cold and stale, carrying with it the metallic scent of a space that had been sealed for years. Sir Malcolm stepped forward first, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. What he saw in those first moments made him pause longer than he had paused at any crime scene in his entire career. The vault was not large, perhaps 3 meters square, lined with fireproof panels and reinforced steel. But its size was deceptive. What mattered was not the space itself, but what filled it. Rows of carefully labeled boxers, filing cabinets with locks that had never been opened by palace staff, a small safe within the larger vault, and on a central table, as if waiting to be discovered, a leather portfolio embossed with Andrew's initials. Sir Malcolm reached for the portfolio first. His hands, steady through decades of high-pressure investigations, trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were documents, correspondence, and records that painted a picture far more complex and far more damaging than anyone had anticipated. Financial transfers to offshore accounts, communications with individuals whose names had appeared in previous investigations, detailed records of transactions that had no clear explanation, and even more troubling, timestamps that contradicted statements Andrew had made under oath during previous inquiries. David Crane moved to the filing cabinets using tools provided by the forensics specialist to carefully open each drawer. What he found were years of meticulous record-keeping, bank statements showing activity and accounts the palace had no knowledge of, legal documents related to properties held under shell companies, and most disturbingly correspondence that suggested Andrew had been aware of certain financial arrangements. Long before he claimed ignorance during earlier palace reviews, the digital forensic specialist focused on a laptop found inside the small internal safe. It was an older model deliberately kept offline, its hard drive encrypted with software designed to resist standard investigative tools. But he had encountered such protections before. Within 90 minutes, he had bypassed the encryption and begun extracting files. What emerged were email drafts never sent but carefully preserved messages that revealed conversations, strategies, and acknowledgments that directly contradicted the narrative Andrew had maintained for years. By the time dawn broke over Windsor, the team had cataloged enough evidence to fill 16 separate evidence boxes. Each item was photographed, documented, and sealed according to protocols that would ensure legal integrity. Sir Malcolm made the call to Buckingham Palace at 6:32 a.m., reaching a senior aide who had been waiting through the night for exactly this update. The conversation was brief. Sir Malcolm chose his words carefully, aware that, even on a secure line, certain details required face-to-face delivery, but the core message was unmistakable. "We found what we were looking for, and it is worse than anyone expected." Within minutes, alerts reached Kensington Palace, Clarence House, and Gatcombe Park. William was briefed while preparing for an early morning engagement. Anne received the news during her daily review of schedules and correspondence. Charles, still at Clarence House, sat in silence after hearing the summary, his face drawn with the weight of what this discovery meant for his brother, for the family, and for the institution he had sworn to protect. Across the Atlantic, where it was still the middle of the night, American intelligence officials, who had been monitoring the situation as part of ongoing international inquiries, received their own notifications. The vault's contents had implications that stretched far beyond British borders. By the time the sun rose fully over London, casting pale winter light across the frosted grounds of Buckingham Palace, one truth had become inescapable. The secrets Andrew had locked away were no longer his to control, and the consequences of their discovery would reshape the monarchy in ways no one could yet fully comprehend. The path that led to the vault, the decision to breach Andrew's vault, did not happen suddenly. It was the culmination of 18 months of mounting pressure, quiet investigations, and a series of events that slowly convinced even the most cautious palace advisors that no other option remained. The beginning can be traced back to the spring of 2024 when renewed international attention on the Epstein case brought Andrew's name back into global headlines. Documentary series aired on American networks, investigative journalists published new findings, and most significantly, congressional inquiries in the United States began requesting information about financial transactions involving individuals connected to the Epstein network. At first, the palace believed it could weather the storm through silence, the strategy that had worked, however, imperfectly during previous crises. But this time the pressure came not only from media scrutiny, but from governments. The Foreign Office received discreet inquiries from Washington, questions about whether the British monarchy was cooperating fully with ongoing investigations, whether certain individuals, including Andrew, had been forthcoming about their knowledge of financial arrangements tied to figures under legal scrutiny. King Charles, only 2 years into his reign, faced a dilemma that kept him awake through many long winter nights. His brother had been stripped of titles, removed from public life, and relocated from Royal Lodge, but removing someone from visibility is not the same as resolving the underlying questions about their conduct. And those questions, Charles was learning, had not disappeared. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to resurface. Princess Anne was among the first senior royals to argue that waiting was no longer viable. During a private meeting at Windsor in the summer of 2024, she presented Charles with a folder containing press clippings, intelligence summaries, and legal analyses. Her message was blunt, as it always was. If we do not investigate Andrew ourselves, others will do it for us. And when that happens, we lose control of the narrative entirely. William shared Anne's concerns, though his approach was more measured. He understood that opening an investigation into a sitting royal, even one already disgraced, set a precedent the monarchy had avoided for generations. But he also understood that the alternative, allowing questions to fester while external investigators grew more aggressive, posed an even greater risk to the institution's credibility. Camilla, navigating her own complex position within the family, worried primarily about the toll on Charles. She had watched him carry the burden of Andrew's scandals for years, defending his brother long past the point when most advisors believed defense was possible. She feared that another wave of revelations could destabilize Charles's health and undermine the careful work he had done to modernize the monarchy's image. The turning point came in October of 2024, when the Foreign Office,